And Dragons in the Crease, a poem in terse rima by Gilchrist Haas. It's been quite a few years, but let's start it again. Another attempt at terse rima. We'll have to recall the junctures at which things bend and resolve into folds of this structured schema, this scrolling, lineated escritoire to which news flies in from Longyearbyen and Lima, right to this equidistance that isn't too far from the epicenter of everything righteous and good on this third planet from our star, and capable of recording a smattering of all that enchants us until we cease, from ephemeral tidings to earth-shattering developments that require angels and police. Ah, this novel world of 2020. Rest assured we will find some dragons in its crease. This year possesses its own peculiar plenty. It's an absolute cornucopia for me, in fact, like Holden Caulfield's rich auntie, suffering from dementia and myopia, who sends him birthday money every month, fueling his search for Manhattan utopia. Indeed, it's granted me much thought on which to munch. Life, death, diseases that haunt in between, decades of inspiration derived from a hunch, or hunches I had on the day I turned 13, and all the happiness along my way I've owed to simple axioms on which to lean whenever life has plunged me into bouts of dismay that serve to place my ecstasies in check, preventing false abandon and moral decay. Yes, pandemic's been good to me, so what the heck? Take the good in life however it comes. Don't let it be an albatross around your neck. They only look like prickly pears, those precious plums. It's the best response we can make to fate. Otherwise, we unravel our future all thumbs, with our desperate fingers tied up in its grate, and destiny becoming tangled up as we're dumped into a cul-de-sac of the late. Life doesn't flow so much as dangle from its cup at times. At times we need to stretch and reach. But it isn't too far. You just need to angle up a bit and reach out and grab it, your plum, your peach. At least that's what I've learned from pandemic. But they say it's everyone's job to own his each. But of course, there's mass entertainment in panic, when people are not really all that scared, but pretend they are. The feeling is endemic with all of us who secretly think we've been spared. Endemic, though the disease itself isn't. Concern and schadenfreude, of course, become paired. Until we really get sick, which isn't pleasant. At that point, gears are switched to survival, and self-satisfaction flies up like a pheasant into the crosshairs of mortality's rival. We realize this isn't any joke, though apocalypse by flu ain't in the Bible, and don't appear in no words from that Patmos bloke who will confound pseudo-Christians till kingdom come, the opiate of the masses on which they toke. But I won't deny that at times I'm rather glum. There's such a thing as too much solitude, and I need to social distance from beer and rum. Such fair weather friends don't always enhance my mood, but cause me to wallow in self-pity. I feel like John is consoled by Paul in Hey Jude. But it's good to know we're all like Walter Mitty, alone behind our masks and our daydreams, alleviating monotony with witty remarks on the idiocies that fall in reams from the mouth of our stupid orange prez, as the Dems and the Repubs assemble their teams and cry the opposition's lack of COVID creds, with interns to study the latest poll, while seeking the scoop on Trump's or on Biden's meds. But they're not the same from this poet's grassy knoll. I ain't saying that they're equally bad. Biden's a decent man, and Trump an orange troll who was scorned and ill-treated by a racist dad, reportedly a member of the Klan. On the day that they lock him up, I'll sure be glad. But heaven forbid that Biden's an also ran in November. If so, we might as well call it quits, rechristen our nation Trumpistan, and surrender 244 to a living hell. The years it's been, that is, since British rule. 244 years since they cracked that bell. Yeah, shut your trap about it. I ain't no fool. I didn't say it cracked that very day. At present it sits in the Philly vestibule. The dawn has brought me a new morning on a tray. Yesterday it seems I got stuck on Trump. Surely there are nobler topics fashioned from clay, and I have no real desire in this poem to stump for the Democratic opposition. It would hardly do more than leave me with a lump in my throat. Call it poetic superstition, but it's a conviction I have long held that the topical often leads to perdition. Its trees are attractive, but before long they're felled, and nobody seems to care for felled trees. Soon no one will even recall how Trump was spelled, and his trunk will fester over with swarming bees. His wraith will set up a resort in hell, where Cerberus will poop on his favorite teas. Jesus, I just can't seem to give it up. Oh well. When I talked to God, I knew he'd understand. So sang Fleetwood Mac. As for me, I cannot tell the extent to which the universe may be manned or spirited by a sympathetic ear of divine ecumenical make and brand that'll reassure me that things are copacetic whenever I have fallen on hard times, or administer a spiritual emetic to purge me of repressed and undigested crimes, as loath as they are to quit their coverts, though they manifest in hilarity and rhymes and the other things Freud mentioned. In other words, belief in me is really a null set, beyond the conviction bread is better buttered. In the afterlife, I may have a tete-a-tete with the Maker and express my concern with design problems over which I often fret, like why human beings find it so hard to learn to properly care for their habitat and curb their constant need to excessively yearn for too much of this and beyond their share of that. Human possession's a bottomless pit, seemingly endless like the cat in the hat's hat. Yet who can say, I don't like this one little bit? Juvenal can harp, but still he burns trash, while Nero, surveying Rome, has a hissy fit and plays the violin as it's turning to ash, and the Goths get ready to storm the hill. It's the human tempo, crash and burn, burn and crash. Nobody likes a critique when it's very shrill. Like Swift, you must pepper your barbs with laughs. Politicians supply us with grist for that mill, oversupply us, indeed, with brimming carafes of ebullient greed and turpitude. Today it's far beyond Gerald Ford's pratfall gaffes or Clinton's actions that by consensus were lewd and inappropriate for his station, or Nixon's private indulgence in language crude. It's directly proportionate to damnation, that's to say, cathartic hilarity that hurls big questions in the face of creation, such as the lack of fundamental parity between evolutionary status and what one might call existential clarity. You, dear reader, see these products of afflatus scrolling from top to bottom, high to low, in a continuum sans pause or hiatus. But I sleep in its coverts and wake with dawn's crow, or rather with the sense I've slept my fill. I peer from my pillow on the syllabic glow of the little nugget I placed below the hill in the middle of that final tercet, then decide on the notes on which to further trill. This morning I'm trilling as far as I can get from the moron whose last name rhymes with Gump, to whom bards can never repay their comic debt. And only ridiculous words that wheel and bump appear to rhyme with that idiot's name in a dense and festering cacophonic clump. Warhol's old saw about 15 minutes of fame. How did minutes become years, years decades? This is far more time than inanity should claim. From testimonials of his repentant aids to his flirtations with conspiracy theories and his muddled, jingoistic tirades, From his fans' misrecognition of heresy as sooth from Solomon reincarnate. The trouble is, it's no longer embarrassing. Uncle Sam has ennobled a jackass, darn it, and this does not disturb us any more, though we see that the king ain't clothed in no garment, and the world sees in him the rot that's at our core, the endgame of our original sin, our ignominy after 4 score. You can add that one to the commodious bin of cantos in which I've broken my word never to let a grimace devolve from a grin. There's more spite than fun in phrases like orange turd. I love the way that was capitalized by Siri, who evidently at least has heard of the one whom in these tercettes is so despised. You see, this thing's a true obsession. I shun the theme, but it keeps on getting reprised. It's as if I'm stuck until I've learned my lesson, but it's a battle I don't want to fight. I'd love to dole it out to some clueless Hessian. Ah, the curse of the topical, the poet's plight. I probably won't get killed like Aesop, but it does cause me to stay wide awake at night. Honestly, though, I need to cut this out ASAP before my reader's up and leave the poem. The poem just needs to relax and put its feet up and cozy itself out in its syllabled home. There's no reason for it to get bogged down in the topical, with its ephemeral foam that floods its alleys when the circus comes to town. Not the circus in the Los Lobos tune, but the one beneath the emperor's missing gown. It's canopied. They can't see the naked buffoon as up above he pisses down on them and makes use of their canopy as a spittoon. A grotesque repetition of Swift's Man Mountain, Pied Piper of White Yankee hoi polloi, sweating out the urine they drank from the fountain. You might well imagine that this is all a ploy to reel the poem's object in unawares, like the rabbit in Monty Python's spoof of Troy. We laugh when the captors are caught in their own snares. In fact, there's no pinning this bastard down. And like Mario, he comes with infinite spares. A world historical, mortal immortal clown and real-world take on Asimov's Jackal, although no Harry Seldon exists to expound how to save humanity from this debacle. There's no benevolent puppet master, no magic machinery, no block and tackle, no deus ex machina thwarting disaster, no way to seize, silence, paralyze, or bury this orange Beelzebub in plaster, who should end his life a miserable miser. I don't even want him in a prison. He'd rally the condemned like a dethroned Kaiser and have somebody ghostwrite his sacred mission, like Hitler in the 20s with Mein Kampf. I'd rather see him free, in abject derision, forgotten, forsaken, verloren und verdammt. A death preceding his death in the real, a symbolic death in which he'd be roundly lumped with other shysters of demagogic appeal, and no way to batten on royalties from the latest edition of Art of the Deal, unrepentant but permanently ill at ease, severed from his media enablers, and no means for establishing new loyalties. Of course, there's much else going on in the papers. The American West Coast is on fire. From Oahu, we can see the burning tapers, and climate change deniers are fueling the pyre. Which reminds me that I'm rather eager to mention it was Morrison who paired desire with fire and pyre, though the credit goes to Krieger. I learned this in a rockumentary. Empire would have been too grand, inspire too meager. The deniers are backed by corporate gentry, who don't care if the world ends when they're gone, or if there is a 22nd century, so long as they have immigrants to mow their lawn, while supporting anti-immigration laws and doling out sinecures to their spoiled spawn. We're ruining our tiny patch of creation, we humans, and yes, it's a worn-out theme. Are we a paroxysm of God's frustration with himself, symptom of a loss of self-esteem in a flagging competition with gods of other universes, or a munch-like scream that's caused a violent ripple within the pods of mind and matter? Are such questions raised in the orbits of other spheres on other sods? And are their anthropomorphic totems dispraised for allowing things to turn to havoc? As on the streets, protesters are wrongfully tased, and boys with machine guns peer down from each attic, each one looking across at the other, quite proud of his obsidian automatic? After every fifth tercet, it's another opportunity to push the reset button, a bit like returning to one's mother. You're hoping that the next one will turn out decent, not too far out from all that is at stake, but not absolutely clinging to the recent. The downside is that you can't really take a break, or else you're stuck with another fragment instead of this edifice you're trying to make that sheds some light on the current human pageant and adds something new to the world of verse through a framework that acknowledges each tangent without neglecting the whole in which it's immersed. Shelley, to be sure, drowned while penning his. As I neither boat nor swim, I won't be so cursed. I read The Triumph of Life last night over a gin fizz for the first time in a number of years. I remember being inspired by the finesse and lack of trepidation with which Shelley clears a path through the lofty thoughts in his head, with this mechanism which confounded his peers. 500 and some odd lines, but then he was dead. Who knows if he would have bested Dante? Thank heavens that Mary found them under the bed. I like to read them in a quiet andante, with the lights turned dim and the moon turned bright, and a nice carafe of acidic Chianti, which help loosen the tercets Shelley wound so tight, so that the lines flow freely off the spool and speak out round and clear within the dome of night. What if he hadn't drowned? What would have been the fuel to motor his tercets at each middle? Would he have put Wordsworth to further ridicule? What motifs would he have featured on his fiddle? Would he have sung once more about Islam or returning to Ozymandias' riddle? Would he have belabored tropes like the poet's palm and rug-worn abstractions like death and sleep? Maybe it would just have been ditties for his mom. Yes, I've got my own abstractions. The hill is steep, the one I climb each day called poesy, pronounced po-s-e, with chasms that I must leap, into which a sudden plunge is grim and messy. But my last resort is this simple fact. I'm both landlord and tenant, lesser and lessee, of this home in which I enact what I enact. I pay the rent but then collect it back. And I decide whether or not to observe tact, and who should be offended when I get off track. That's the wonderful thing about a poem. It battens on what would otherwise seem a lack of stability when you're squatting in a home on which you owe a debt that's symbolic, as you build it yourself on the collective loam of the language that you speak, which is bucolic or urban, middle class or plebeian, right-wing or left-wing, sober or alcoholic, post-industrial age or pre-Arcadian, depending on each poet's time and place, his temperamental north-south meridian. We're always virtual and never face-to-face in any number of ways, if you think of it. Take writing, a wholly virtual place, and raise your virtual glasses so we can clink upon hearing the sacred homophone on holy as it's funneling down through the sink of this fountain, or its metaphorical clone. A place, that is to say, in which we share our thoughts while remaining physically alone, you and I, yourself, myself, a platonic pair. Plato lived at the advent of writing, or near it, as his cave-dwellers winced at the glare, ignorant as to the dawn that was igniting, in which men would bury themselves in books, leading to innovations in indoor lighting, and security tech to prevent household crooks from invading the new interiors and plundering everything down to laundry hooks and cushions on which we rested our derrieres while learning to love our Innerlichkeit. Cain and Abel would abide in virtual pairs, except when conditions would induce a real fight, often involving bloodshed, swords and tanks, and protracted armistices to lessen spite. It would be in nooks of libraries up on banks of rivers that had conveyed men to death, where statements of peace and ceremonial thanks would be drafted with commas for virtual breath to mark pauses not in speech but in thought, the real re-emerging as myth and shibboleth. Before continuing any further, I ought to describe the hiatus I've taken from this meshwork in which some impressions were caught. Life intervened once more in the act of making, as oft becomes the case with poetry. It was mid-autumn, and the yard needed raking, pausing the efforts of this earnest votary for what should have been a few hours at most. Then I got lost on my way to the notary, and before you knew it, I was fully engrossed in a veritable sala-saloo on a venture that spat me up onto its coast, where indeed I had problems, and more than a few. And then Joe Biden won the election, removing the cud on which I'd been wont to chew. Shortly thereafter, the Orange Insurrection, trumping once again satirical verse, and competition is not my predilection. America's plight, though funny, is dire or worse, even when the most we can do is laugh, or put down our pens and throw up our hands and curse, or exit ourselves from life like Sylvia Plath, whose early poems are genuinely great before she unwound into dyspeptic self-wrath. The line that separates measured contempt from hate is thin and subject to seasonal drift, and this risk is what defines satirical fate. But I take up my pen once more with thoughts to shift away from the topical acerbic with themes that will elevate, inspire, soar, and lift. Triumphing in life has always been quite a trick, to broach again the theme of our Shelley. Decades just laying a foundation, brick by brick, negotiating needs of brain, brawn, and belly, demands of others, of time, age, and place, reconfiguring each enemy as ally, polishing one's faults, but leaving perhaps a trace of each to preserve what is most unique, like the vicissitudes of life scratched on one's face. Then there are the strategies overt and oblique we use to hide or promote ourselves when we've plumbed our utmost nadir or reached our peak. We stockpile the ones we've outgrown on silent shelves, or pass them along to others in need. I've pickled mine for the most part in 10s and 12s. There are so many ways in which we can be freed, but just as many that lead to bondage. And there's the dialectic of plenty and need, want and surfeit, advantage and disadvantage. On either end there are motes of despair. By and large, though, most of us manage to manage. Sometimes it's better to have little more than air. Who'd want to end life like Gatsby or Hearst, with vast chambers of lack-love emptiness to spare? In my own set point for happiness, I'm well versed. I don't need many things at all, in fact. I list my wife at the top as foremost and first, a companion of great intelligence and tact, who stands me up when I am out of sorts, and pumps me up for the acts I need to enact. But we're different. She's very much into sports, and my only sports are the piano, Emily, Kant's 3 critiques, and Nietzsche's retorts. Yet somehow we ended up in the same funnel, swirling lifewards in frothy ecstasy, till one day we expire as a single runnel. And if those last 2 tercettes were strained or messy, well, I get choked up singing of my wife. That's me, Venus's uxorious confessi. Sweet, you're the very first principle of my life, my aim, my desire, my reason, my goal. For 30 years we've been free of Venetian strife. In the long years ere we met, I was partly unwhole, and redundant in other ways to boot. But I'll quit these love lines now before they grow dull. I've no desire for conjugal love to pollute the flow as I'm paddling out this rima, nor can I expect that much in the way of loot for giving in to some dumb love sonnet schema to dilate on love's niceties and tact. It's been decades since I left my tempus prima, or primum, I believe that is, to be exact. Primo tempore is what I'm looking for. Prime time. I've zero Latin, though, in point of fact. Only so many utterances left in store. I've got to mind just how I pick and choose, which thoughts to accentuate and which to ignore, whether to put to flight my magniloquent muse or ground her with my stubby metric mole. Precious few utterances left. No time to lose. Brahms threw his reflection into an empty bowl, which gathered it up and sent it right back. The ears on each side of his head were rather droll. A cleft palate emerged within a porcelain crack, and the face was blemished with kitchen stains, each of them corresponding to an inner lack, some impediment to das Ich, as Freud explains. He rose and returned to his Streicher grand to ponder how best to score this new lied's refrains, piano voicings, and how the cadence should land. He was haunted by that porcelain double, which showed an alter self incomplete and unplanned. Do Heine's images give him this much trouble? He found a cleaner likeness in a mirror, then calmly shaved his beard to a prickly stubble. From Plato to Brahms he strives to make things clearer, yet the cosmos confounds his every search. Every man, my precious impetuous peer, you've flown Hubble then Webb, and what's next from your perch? Our cosmos now may be one of many. A feeble excuse to leave this one in the lurch? And other reasoned creatures, you've found not any. For all we can tell, they may not exist. An abysmal emptiness, murky and fenny. Yet thoughts of one world, one God still seem to persist. I'd like to have a cosmos of my own and confect an incredulous race from the mist of men and women who'd toss me off of my throne if I so much as willed to call them mine. I'd leave them to themselves, and they'd leave me alone. I fancy, in fact, I'm owed this from the divine. I've been a good boy, I've said my prayers, and my Mars and Neptune currently are in trine. A crew, then, please, of anthropic single payers. I'll dorm them in eternity for free and demarcate a limited hell for strayers. I'll disavow their attempts to acknowledge me as some father or heavenly savior. There'll be nothing like sin or sin's apology, and scofflaws will exit hell for good behavior. Knowledge and doubt will be nicely alloyed, with saints to promulgate this like Francis Xavier. They'll have no need for Moses or Calvin or Freud, in lieu of whom I'll institute a creed for making the best of things in this puzzling void. That's a great idea, a statement. Yes, indeed. I believe in one void, one empty space that ab initio possessed nor stone nor weed, nor dimension, nor motherly fatherly face. One emptiness jam-packed into a speck, a point that one day all of a sudden, by grace of some mysterious leftover omnitech from a previous collapsed primiverse, expanded exponentially from foot to neck, giving rise to existence, which we now rehearse. The void became matter to take control of space and time by having something to disperse through itself to make it more than a giant whole. Matter became us when it needed smarts, but it took us a while to evolve from the mole. Yes, the chain of being took place in fits and starts, and led to minor fuck-ups like the roach, and to holes that would have been better left as parts. I believe in the non-existence of some coach who pre-existed us and formed us so, and if there is such a one, she doesn't encroach on our need to make ourselves. She doesn't bestow. I believe we find our own way to truth, that the matter we are can ultimately know, can fathom its own heart with empirical proof, can learn how best to buttress and sustain, to interrogate our immense celestial roof. I believe that this solemn creed will make it plain to ourselves that we live to laugh and thrive, although we emerged from little more than a stain. Wow, didn't know I had that much in my carafe. I like it that I've made myself a girl. I suppose, then, I'll have to ditch the rod and staff. What would be fitting? Perhaps a ladle and pearl? Yes, entire faiths centered on Mom, not Dad. Lineages favoring Countess over Earl. Sin and guilt for making mothers, not fathers, mad. A different experience for sure, all the way down to men's suffrage. That would be rad. I'll handle the gig as a divine sinecure, with little else to do but gaze and preen, here and there scratching in an obscure signature that will send them off in search of a golden mean. But enough pointless fancies of godhood. My path through recent tercettes has been serpentine. There, a working cosmology, duly dotted. Not too shabby for a half-day's work, although I'll admit it was randomly plotted. From line-by-line planning, it's true I mostly shirk. I'm similar to Melville's Bartleby, who'd frankly prefer not to play the routine clerk. I'm prompted by things that suddenly startle me, that catch my eye or brush my tympany. Whatever it is that will make a bard of me. A gust of wind or 3 bars from a symphony can knock me down and set me in a trance. Great songs can make both a man and a wimp of me. When terpsichore knocks, no choice but to let her dance. Such lack of discipline leads to dry spells, to hustle me out of which I rely on chance. As I guide this rima through the various swells and lulls necessitated by the scheme, I'm reminded from time to time to ring the bells of Shelley's poem, and its sadly unfinished dream that ends in conversation with Rousseau, a spirit who Shelley thinks has run out of steam. I've quite a kinship with Jean-Jacques, I'll have you know. I once got busted for reading at work, and addiction to print was his downfall, I trow. He confesses in Confessions that he would shirk all else, just so long as his eyes were glued to the latest shrift he couldn't put down. He'd lurk in kitchen pantries, slavering over the crude titillations in the latest novel to challenge the morals of each Genevan prude. Stuff that somehow escaped the Calvinist shovel, resulting down the line in modern porn. Sadly, the narrative breaks off in a muddle. Shelley, through his Rousseau, appears to want to warn the 19th century about the mess that revolution and its reaction have borne. Why he stopped work on this poem is anyone's guess. He asks Rousseau directly, "What is life?" after the latter has conveyed his great distress or excess freedom resulting in widespread strife. What sort of answer does he expect? There's no commentary from Mary, Percy's wife. She just says it's mystic and expresses respect for her husband's mysterious opus. Bafflement explains her interpretive neglect, perhaps. Responding to what is life is hopeless, and maybe that's why Shelley broke it off. The cosmos may be a wheel, but life is spokeless. The question drove Shelley's rima into a trough. Horses rarely recover from broken legs, and I'll never return a serve from Coco Golf. What is life is a question for taverns and kegs. Thus mused the poet as he launched his skiff. It must be fully quaffed from the cream to the dregs. The storm clouds thickened as his brow grew dark and stiff, although with no awareness of his doom. The answer is but a hypothetical if. The deep absorbed a flash and a resounding boom, as quiet turned to turmoil in the blast. The poet dragged these thoughts to his watery tomb. The triumph of life. What triumph? It doesn't last. Or maybe it lasts but doesn't abide except as a fable from someone else's past. But no, if I've said I've never triumphed, I've lied. In fact, I've had far fewer downs than ups, and the downs I've learned more and more to take in stride. I've built my organ with innumerable stops, or more than I can count at any rate. If I pulled them all out at once, they might call the cops, though laws on noise tend to differ from state to state. The one I'm in is pretty lenient. I guess I pose no imminent threat to its fate, nor would it find my removal expedient. I have no problem with its sundry laws. I'm law-abiding and mostly obedient. So never call me a rebel without a cause, though it's true as a kid I loved James Dean. Had he lived today, he'd be playing Santa Claus, long decades after his role as an angry teen. Ah, those fading Hollywood warhorses. I rarely venture any more to the screen. The genres, in my view, have all run their courses. Narrative has been ruined by high tech and pernicious ideological forces. Give me a film with Deneuve or Gregory Peck. Otherwise, I'll just sit at home and read, or watch South Park take down Trump and similar dreck, or add lines to my own anti-Trumpian screed. Damn it, why must we circle back to Trump, who reasserts himself like some cancerous need? A national embarrassment, an orange stump of seemingly immortal rotten wood, a moron with half the IQ of Forrest Gump. Comparisons are infinite, though none are good when fools outpace such satirists as me. And not that Dickens or Swift or Rabelais could. No doubt Trump's a fascist, but some of us are free, yes, still free if just for these few moments, to speak on behalf of the poor or take a knee to protest injustice wherever it foments, or advocate benign paternity to all the would-be Fred Trumps and Willie Lomans. Gen Xers like me are more and more hermity. As a cohort, we've ceased to make our Earth a better place in a brighter eternity. From Longyearbyen to Lima, Reykjavik to Perth. Final movement. Shall it be a recap, or something dirge-like, say a eulogy to mirth? Or a soporific, a poetic CPAP, like Dr. Seuss's classic book on sleep? Or a shock ending, a hammer to the kneecap, a wolf emerging from the stomach of Bo Peep? Ah, let it be all this and so much more. Like Guido in 8½, I'll take a leap right out of the plot into Nino Rota's score, the music dictating the final scenes in which the tale unravels into shredded lore. The director no longer knowing what it means, but hoping he will make a certain splash. The producers looking on and venting their spleens, having built their careers on confabula of cash. Or else I'll doff my Haas and don my Jones and, much like the Jones and Dylan, empty the trash and fill my verse with some rubbish, complete unknowns that might else have been incinerated but now are doing just fine, establishing thrones on piles of tercettes they themselves have created. A sort of poetic reclamation to which tropes dead through overuse are refaded and, arm in arm, rise up to form a new nation comprised of words, expressions, and phrases revived through semantic rehabilitation. But better to focus first on that which pleases, like a sudden switch to another vowel, or an increase in pauses we place in creases. There's a strong impulse to just throw in the towel. Can poetry obtain in such an age? We become prosaic when we always cry foul. How long can our tropes and figures withstand our rage? We hang Napoleon like Byron did. He dies an imaginary death on the page. Then we seal Dracula's cask with an iron lid, and suddenly our world is filled with peace. As there is no heir apparent, we'll hire some kid whom we'll drag out of the poverty of some crease. A dragon in the crease, they'll later say. He'll reign for decades in a poem with no police. It'll be an aesthetic solely based on play. One method, perhaps, for keeping it up as our real horizons turn a gloomier gray. Trump was on the news today. He looked all beat up. Imagine what it takes to be a dick. A barrage of new lies, and they're eating it up. But the more his lies succeed, the more he looks sick. Who will ever know the devil's bargain through which he walled himself in, brick by golden brick? Someday academies will evolve a jargon to analyze the means he used to trick dupes whose noggins are filled with ignoble argon, which causes them to be fooled in an algenblick. Argon's deemed the laziest element, in case that N-rhyme 3 lines above failed to click. I explain this so that you'll gather my intent. It's also classed as noble, hence the pun. Like Trump, it likes to imagine it's heaven sent. God damn it, this poem, like all poems, is just for fun. You might notice it's under diremption, a term that Herr Hegel one day in Jena spun. You could say it grants us creative exemption, a certain type of poetic license that can bring indecision to full redemption. I'm aware the reader might find it a nuisance to have to shift the gaze from left to right. You can chalk it up to postmodern insouciance. We postmoderns are prone to vagaries of flight. This one involves unwinding into strands, and it's all I can do to keep them both in sight and cater to each of their follies and demands. Quite soon, of course, they'll need to reconcile before they reify into separate brands. It's time these two strands return to their domicile. We need them to clasp hands and reunite. We'll keep their complaints about each other on file and expect they'll entwine as one without a fight. There's so much more to contemplate than verse, and this poem has endeavored to keep steady sight on the world outside the poem, which has gotten worse. That is, it's striven hard to keep abreast of deplorable events that we all must curse. And I do so without trying to be a pest, with tirades no one really wants to read. A challenge that is each poet's gauntlet and test. Needless to say, it's a challenge that goes unfeed. Finally, some closing words to assess where we're at right now. I'll try to give it some speed. Whether we'll survive ourselves is anyone's guess. Putin and Trump don't leave much cause for hope. A nuclear blast or some other global mess may send us to kingdom come, each savant, each dope. In chapter Omega, the world expires, and with it haute cuisine, the Shakespearean trope, all our desires swept up in all-consuming fires. The world now sails headlong through a dire strait, and the captains of our ships are consummate liars. Must we be tethered to their and each next fool's fate? Oh, to be much more than skin and bones. The hour, so far as we know it, is getting late. We soon may be reduced to dead life, draping stones. Alas, we'll never know the aftermath. For by then we'll be gone, long gone, each Haas, each Jones. These pauses are dragons. On occasion they howl, as silences can do when they are pressed. Like an angry Benedictine beneath his cowl, or Garth Hudson blowing that fever from his chest. Ah, the lapdogs and flunkies and sycophants are putting our nation and the world to a test, emerging from the crease like an army of ants. Though maybe that's an insult to all ants. Internet Beobachters, ice Gestapo plants, ready to act on his next idiotic rants. Our tragicomic commander-in-cheats, who governs by the seat of his unzippered pants. In 4 to 8 year segments, history repeats, at least in the good old U.S. of A. Tragedy followed by farcical bovine bleats. A scene just came to me from David Bowie's Stay. Some days are in revolt against their week, which seems weighted down in sluggish, prolonged delay. It's as if they expect the god of time to speak and appoint them to a livelier frame. This one is either too modern or too antique. Moreover, it's yoked to a sun without a name. Likewise, our time seems one without a name, running wilder, ever wilder without a name, despite its fame. In fact, it famishes in fame. Sadly enough, these two words don't relate. Their alliterative use here is somewhat lame. Its cause is demolishment, it doesn't create. It pays little mind to the crackling fuse. In the words of our bard, the hour is getting late. I never write to offend, but just to amuse. Sure, there are some thoughts I'd like to share, but beyond a point, solemnity's just obtuse. All poetry is a joyful jouissance of the air. I know that's redundant as hell, by gum. Ebullience that floats us up from stair to stair. It's the silliness, not the cold, that makes us numb. The descent back to prose just brings us down. Mundanity is so often bleak and glum. Our feet are happy to be back on solid ground, and now we'll take another sort of rest as we shuffle about our earthly lost and found. Yes, it's filled with highs, lows, and in-betweens, this quest after life and language that makes life live through airings that lift us up to our very best. This poem has given as much as it's got to give, and now it's time to bring things to a close. 2 columns need to funnel back down through the sieve and do it without devolving back into prose. We'll recapitulate the major theme, which pertains to our current dangers, I propose. Each poem is a spastic rendition of a dream that decenters our view of something real by prying the stitchwork that runs along each seam. While it's true I'd rather focus on Spaß und Spiel, in this one I've had to get serious. To the exigence of our age do I appeal. No time to sit and be passively curious. This poem has placed me under some duress. Its activity has made me delirious. How our troubles will resolve is anyone's guess. Right now I'm seeing little cause for hope. But this world we're in transcends America's mess and will outlast the mistakes of our orange dope. At any rate, it seems he'll soon expire. His legacy will be that of a shameful trope that will haunt us until the everlasting fire. Could be his example helps set things straight if the whole shebang doesn't perish with this liar. For years we've been aware of our possible fate of being reduced to cinders and bones. We don't yet know if it's ever really too late. Maybe we should take our cues from the Rolling Stones, who triumph only after Aftermath, one of their earlier albums with Brian Jones. The poet gathered her linens and walked outside. One of her poems had offended a friend who cried, "I had no intention of such. I haven't tried. How can I know which words may cause some fret? They fall to me. Some are accepted, some denied. The elected gleam through the frames in which they're set. This poem will disturb as that poem will please. Thus so with our several fates. And yet. An insight came to her like a jangling of keys shortly after this score of poems on bees, as she observed the laundry flapping in the breeze. Our universe is filled with planets such as these. Suddenly Emily dropped to her knees and looked up to Venus and Mars above the trees. Somewhere there figured on a vast platonic frieze, each one with a vulgar, bragging beast, though beasts are often friends. Let's call them frenemies. Yes, Emily knew this much at the very least. Life triumphs best with dragons in its crease. Before my spool has run out, as priestess or priest, I'll assemble a world of my own, piece by piece. I'll purchase on a 1,000,000 annum lease some Eden, or better, some pre-Hellenic Greece, before Olympia, and ere the golden fleece evolved from flights of microscopic geese, into which I'll insert, with moxie and caprice, some dragons in its crease. Yes, dragons in the crease, a plenum filled with hymns to love and peace, and dragons, and dragons, and dragons in the crease. So here they are, some dragons in the crease. And thus concludes And Dragons in the Crease, a poem in terse rima by Gilchrist Haas.